Welcome back, folks. It is your boy, Editor Matt. You guys asked for it. In this video, we are going to be going over the basics of After Effects in 10 minutes. By the end of this video, you will be the most professional beginner there is. You'll know exactly how to open After Effects, you'll know what all the buttons do, and you'll know how to export a video. Yep, that's it. I really hope this video is under 10 minutes, but if it's not, you're welcome. Just think of it as a bonus. Alright, let's get into it. So a quick overview. Firstly, why would you need to learn After Effects? Well, let me tell you. If you are a filmmaker or video editor, knowing After Effects is going to make you more valuable. I have literally been hired by marketing agencies just to open After Effects templates because they don't know how to add their own information into the templates. Even though it was just a template and there wasn't much work to do, you still needed to know how to open up the program, how to navigate your compositions, and change the text. Plus, on top of that, in my last job as like a cinematographer, I was also doing a lot of logo animations for our videos. Now, to give a quick description of what After Effects is, it is a video editing software that allows you to manipulate footage and shapes to however you like. I would say there are two main avenues you can go in After Effects. You can go the VFX route, which is where I have most of my knowledge, or there is the motion graphics route. This is where you're going to be animating shapes and text. You can do 2D animations as well as 3D animations in After Effects. So what I'm going to be going over in After Effects today is how to open up the software and start your own project. There's a bit you got to know there. Then we're going to import footage. I'm going to go through each panel in the workspace and we're going to explain what it does. I'm also going to show you how to set up a good workspace. And then I'll go through all the tools and explain what they do, go over some of the most important shortcuts. We're going to take a look at keyframes and how to do that in After Effects, which will lead us into creating masks as well as shapes. And then finally, I'm going to show you the two ways to export your video. All right, let's get into it. So when we first open up After Effects, we're going to see this box. From here, we can open up previous projects or start a new project. There's also a section here where you can take a look at Adobe's tutorials on how to use After Effects, but instead, you chose to watch my video. So thank you. Let's over to the left here and click New Project. Now immediately before we do anything, I just want to go up to File, Save As, and save the project. The reason why we do this is because by default, you can actually do a bunch of work without saving the project at all, and the software could crash and you'll have nothing left. So by saving your project immediately, you're going to enable that autosave and you'll just cover your butt. All right, let's start out by clicking New Composition. So by default, it'll be called Comp 1. I'm just going to keep it as Comp 1, but you can rename it here. You can select a preset for different aspect ratios or resolutions, but I'm just going to type in 1920 by 1080. And then you can select your frame rate. I'm going to use 23.976 because that's what my camera shoots. I believe this is our preview resolution. I'm going to keep it on full. We can customize our time code, and then we're going to select the duration of our timeline. I'm going to do 20 seconds. And then lastly, we can change the color of the background in our composition. I usually just leave this black. Hit OK, and now we have a 20-second 1920 by 1080 composition. Let's import some footage. Now there are two ways to import your footage. The easiest way is to come up to this project panel and double-click in the gray space. And then you can just click on your footage and import. Now to import our footage, we can either pull it down to the timeline or we can pull it into the preview window. I prefer to pull it into the timeline because if we pull it into the preview window, it's not going to be centered. So let's pull it down to the timeline. Now our footage by default will be at the beginning of the clip, but if I wanted a different section of the clip, what I could do is double click my footage, select a portion of my clip, say I wanted this spot, and then I could pull that down, and now I have that section of the footage. Now I'm going to show you one more way to create a composition. You can select your clip and drag it down to this little piece of film and it'll automatically create a composition that uses exactly your resolution and duration of your clip. It is super handy. Okay, now that we have some footage in our timeline, let's take a look at our workspace. Let's go up to Window and go to Workspace, and right now I have it set to all panels. For now, I'm going to leave it on all panels so I can run through them, and then I'm going to show you how to set up a nice clean workspace. Okay, so if you're familiar with any editing program, we always have a preview window, a timeline, and a bin. Let's start off with the preview window. Now, if you notice up at the top, it says Composition 1. That is because we are looking at this Composition 1 timeline. By the way, if we want to get back to our composition settings, we can hit this little three lines here and then go up to Composition Settings, and we can change our name. Let's actually make this Footage. Now up at the top here it says Composition Footage. Now what if I double click on my layer here? Well, now we have a new preview window called Layer, and then the layer name. Or what if I went to my bin and double clicked on a piece of footage? Now we have a footage preview window. These are 3 different preview windows. I am telling you this now because you can get easily confused if you're doing stuff to your video, but you don't see anything happening. You might have the wrong tab selected. It can be useful to just close the ones that you're not using. All right, let's continue on to our workspace. Over on the right here, we have all our windows collapsed. So first we have info. This is going to give you information about the position of your layer and your in and out points. I personally have not really had a need to use this before, only once when I was writing scripts and I needed to know exact pixel points. And then we'll come down to audio, pretty self-explanatory. Effects and presets. This one is going to be super important for you. This is where you're going to find all your effects. Everything you're going to need in After Effects, you will find it here. Anything from distortions to color correction to noise, chroma keying. There's also animation presets, so by default Adobe includes some text and creative animations that you can use. Honestly, a lot of them are a little bit cheesy, but they can be a good starting point to creating your own animations. Okay, moving on, we have libraries. Honestly, I never use this. I don't know who does use it. If this is helpful for you, please let me know why, because I don't understand. I've never used Adobe's library thing, but maybe I'm missing out. Next, we have Align. This is super handy if you need to make sure your text is in center screen or you need to center an object. You're going to want to use Align for that. And then we have character and paragraph. These two are very self-explanatory. I'm sure if you've ever used text on anything before, you know what these are. Then we have the tracker. This is where things can become a little bit more advanced. We're not going to get into tracking in this video. We're just getting through the basics, but this will allow you to track the motion of something in your footage. Content Aware Fill. This is a new feature that they introduced recently. If you are familiar with Photoshop's Content Aware Fill, it is very similar. It'll try and use its big computer brain to fill in a blank space. The Paint and Brush panels. This is where we will find all our attributes if we are using a tool that uses a brush. For example, the brush tool, the clone stamp tool, or the eraser tool. And then we have Motion Sketch. This is where we can use our cursor to draw any sort of motion, and it will create keyframes for that motion. I honestly have never found a use for this, but maybe that's something you could use. And then we have the smoother panel. This is where you can select some keyframes and it will try and smooth out your keyframes for you. And then we come down to the wiggler. This is where we can add a wiggle expression to a piece of footage to make it automatically move around. This can be pretty handy to create some fake camera movements. And then we have mask interpolation. This one's a little bit more advanced. Let's say you were working on a 60 frame per second piece of footage, but you were converting it back to 24. Sometimes your masks can go wonky, and by using the mask interpolation, you can correct that. Honestly, this is something that I have never actually used before. There are so many ways to use After Effects, it is likely that you will not be using every single piece of tool in this software. Now, before we move on to tools, I'm going to come up to Window, go to Workspace, and come down to Standard. And now I'm going to get rid of libraries by going to Close Panel, and I'm going to get rid of Info. And I probably don't need audio right now. So I noticed that when we just ran through all those panels, the preview window was not there for some reason. This panel is super important. It allows you to change all your playback settings, as well as your preview resolution. Now, not to be confused with your preview window resolution, which is in the middle of the screen here. This is sort of your paused resolution, and this is your play resolution. Okay, so now we have a project with a timeline and a good workspace. Let's move on to the tools. So up at the top left here, we have the home button, which will bring us back to that launcher window that we first saw when we opened the software. And then beside that, we have the selection tool. This will allow us to select and move things around. Now the next one here is our hand tool. This one will actually allow us to move the composition around, not just the layer. This is going to be handy if I need to zoom in on my footage and move around in the clip. Now when we're zoomed in like this, we can come down to this percent and go to fit. Alright, and then the next one is our magnifying glass. You likely won't need to actually use this tool, but if you want to drag a box, it can be pretty handy. Let's go back to fit, and then we have the rotate tool. This will allow us to rotate a selected layer, and again, we probably won't be using this tool very much because we can come down to here and change our properties from here. Now, if you want to be really precise, that's where the tool can come in handy. Now, the next tool here is our camera tool. This is where we start to enter some of the 3D stuff the software can do. We're not going to go too deep into that, but I'll quickly show you what that can do. Okay, so real quick, all of these tools are going to allow you to manipulate the camera just by dragging. Each one uses a different axis to move the camera. So we can orbit a 3D object, or we can zoom in and out, but let's move on. So our next tool here is the anchor point tool or pan behind tool. This will allow us to manipulate where the anchor point is of a clip by clicking and dragging. Okay, moving on, we have our shape tools. These tools can be used in two different ways. We can either create a mask or we can create a shape. So if we click on our footage, we can draw a mask just like that, or if we don't have anything selected, we can draw a shape. And then up at the top, we can change the color of our shape as well as the stroke. We have the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, and the star tool. And beside that, we have the pen tool. It operates in the exact same way the shape tool does, where if I have a layer selected, it will create a mask on the layer, just like that. Or if I do not have a layer selected, it will create a shape. Just like that. Now in the pen tool, we also have the add vertex, delete vertex, convert vertex tool, mask feather tool. These will allow you to manipulate your mask paths in different ways. Moving on, we have the text tool. Pretty straightforward, you click and you type. You can also draw a box to confine your text to that box. And once you start using the tool, the character and paragraph panels should appear. If they do not, you want to go to Window and find them here. This is also where you find all your windows. Under the text tool, there is also the vertical text tool. Does exactly what it says it does. Moving on, we have the brush tool, the clone stamp tool, and the eraser tool. Starting with the brush tool, we can literally just paint on any color onto our layer. Now if you try and click and start drawing, you'll notice nothing actually happens. What you got to do is double click on your layer first, and then it'll open up the layer preview, and then you can start painting. Now down here in our paint panel, we can see I have constant enabled, which if we go into our effects here and go to paint, we can see that my paintbrush will last constantly. But if you wanted to do a frame by frame drawing, you could do single frame and then just paint one, and it'll be gone for the next frame. Now another thing to be aware of here, if you have a previous brush selected and you try painting, it will overwrite that brush. So make sure that you unselect your brush down here in the timeline before you start painting more lines. Okay, moving on. The clone stamp tool works very similarly, where you need to double click on your layer and then you can start drawing. Now to use it, you want to hold down Alt to select a sample frame, and then you can sample from that area. So here I can just erase things. If you're familiar with the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, it works the exact same way. Now keep in mind that your constant and single frame will also take effect here. And then the eraser tool, which is essentially the opposite of the brush tool, it erases things. And then we have the roto brush tool. I just did an entire video on roto brush 2.0, but essentially it allows you to cut out a portion of your clip. And then the puppet tool. This will allow you to put anchor points into your layer and then manipulate them for animation. We're not going to get into that in this video though. Okay, now you know the tools, let's move on to shortcuts. I'm going to go over some of the shortcuts that I use literally every single time I open After Effects. So the first shortcut I'm going to show you is how to duplicate your clip, Control D, and then how to split a clip, Control Shift D. This will split whatever clip is on the playhead. This can be super handy for basic trimming of footage or to duplicate your layer so that you have another layer on top that you can manipulate. That's a common scenario you'll run into in After Effects. I'm going to show you a better way to trim your footage though. So let's just undo that. So let's say I wanted from 4 seconds to 8 seconds. We're going to hold down Alt and click our open curly bracket, and I'm going to scroll down to 8 seconds and go Alt closed curly bracket. And that'll allow us to create our in and out points of our clip while it's in a timeline. Alright, this next one is super handy. Let's pretend that this footage was not 1920 by 1080. And I wanted to upscale it perfectly to my composition. What I'm going to do is select the layer and go Control Alt Shift G or Control Alt Shift H. H is width, G is height, so it'll fit to either the height or the width of your composition. Now if we hover our mouse over all these tools, it'll actually show you what the shortcut is for those tools. So for our selection tool we have V, our hand tool we have H, but also if you just hold down spacebar you can just move around. And then zoom tool Z, but we also have our scroll wheel, rotation tool W, anchor point tool Y, shape tool Q, pen tool G, text tools Control T, brush tool Control B, as well as these other two. You can rotate between the three. And then roto brush Alt W, puppet tool Control P. Okay, those are the main shortcuts. Now if we come down to our timeline, select a layer, and come down to our drop down menu here, we can see all our transform properties. From here we can change whatever we want, rotation, scale, position, anchor point, opacity, as well as our audio. Now the fun thing with After Effects is that there are some very self-explanatory shortcuts to bring up all those properties. For example, we can hit S for scale, A for anchor point, P for position, T for transparency but opacity, R for rotation, and L for audio levels. And if we hit L twice on a clip, it'll bring up our waveforms. Those are super handy and pretty easy to remember because they're just the first letter of the attribute that you want to use. Also, being able to isolate those properties is super helpful as well. Another quick one is U, which will just show you properties that have keyframes, which I don't have any keyframes yet. Which brings us to our next thing we're going to talk about, keyframes. Let's create some position keyframes. I'm going to hit P, enable keyframing, which is this stopwatch here. Now you can see on my timeline there's this little diamond. If I go over to 1 second and I move it, it's going to automatically create another diamond. Come back to 2 seconds and pull it back, and maybe 3 seconds, and then I'm going to put it back in the center. So if we look at our footage, some real entertaining stuff there. So that is how you create keyframes. You can move them around, change the timing, but I'm going to show you how to smooth out your keyframes. A lot of beginners don't understand how to have smooth motion. And for this example, I'm going to use something else. Let's just use a circle. Now, when I'm creating a circle, I can hold down Shift to make it a uniform circle, or I can hold down Control to make the center where I clicked, or I can hold down both to do both. Or if you hold Alt, it doesn't render the preview. Don't know why you'd want that. I'm gonna take the anchor point tool and actually just put the anchor point in the middle. Now, if I hold down Control while doing this, it'll automatically pin to different areas. I just want it in the center there. Okay, great. Now I'm gonna go back to the bottom and hit Key for position, enable keyframes. Now I want my first position to be here and my last position at 1 second to be here. Now I'm gonna hold down Shift to keep that motion perfectly straight and stop there. So now we should have this. Cool. Now I want to smooth out that motion. This is what is known as linear motion. So I'm going to select my keyframes, right click, keyframe assist, and select easy ease. This is a really simple way to just smooth out that animation. Now let's affect the scale. I'm going to select my layer, click S, enable keyframing for scale, bring this to the beginning, come to 1 second, I'm going to hit another keyframe, and then right in the middle, I'm going to do a third keyframe. Now on the center keyframe, I'm going to make this come up to 150%. So this should look like that. Now we're going to use the U shortcut to show just keyframes on that layer. I'm also going to smooth out this motion so it matches the other motion. Now we got a little animation. I'll quickly dive into shape layers. If we take a look at our shape layer, we can go into contents, ellipse, and here we will find our path, our stroke, our fill, and transform. We can also go over to add and add more properties to this shape. You guys can dive into that, but that's all I got to say about shapes for today. Another shortcut we have is B and N. This will allow us to change our workspace in and out point. And another tip here is that say you wanted that to be your composition, we can go up to composition and trim area to work area. And it'll trim your composition to just your work area. This is super helpful. One more shortcut for you is hold down Control and use your arrow keys to go frame by frame. You can also use page up and page down to do the exact same thing, but I prefer Control arrow key. Makes more sense. Let's pull our footage back in and talk about masks. Masking is the process of subtracting an area of your clip or isolating an area of your clip. So to create a mask, like I said earlier, there are two ways. We can use our ellipse tool or we can use our pen tool. Let's just use the ellipse tool in this example, and let's say we wanted to mask out this ball. What we could do is click on the ball, hold down Control, and draw a mask around the ball. Now if we come down to our layer in our mask properties, we have the mask path, which is the shape and position of the mask. And we have our feather, which adds a blurriness around the mask. And we have opacity, which will change the opacity. And then we have expansion, which will make the mask bigger or smaller. We can keyframe any of these properties and do whatever we like. Masking is super essential to anything you'll do with visual effects in After Effects. Now if we wanted to use the pen tool, we could click and drag around our footage and create a mask for your subject. Another thing with masks is you can do an add mask or a subtract mask, as well as just quickly invert your mask. I'm not exactly sure what these other ones do, but it sounds like they are different blending modes that will only affect within your mask. Alright, let's say you have completed your beautiful video in After Effects and you are ready to export. There are two ways to export. You can either export within After Effects or you send it to Media Encoder. If you're using H.264, you want to send it to Media Encoder. If you're using literally anything else, you can probably just do it in After Effects. Okay, so for both ways, we're going to go up to Composition, and we're going to select Add to Render Queue or Add to Media Encoder. Let's start with Add to Render Queue. This is if you want to export within After Effects. So by default, it'll remember the last settings you used from your last export, but we want to go to our Output module, click whatever it is, and then go up to our Format and select what kind of format we want. If you want a video that has a transparent background, I would recommend going to QuickTime and then going to Format Options and then going to Apple ProRes 4444. This is only if you want that transparent background. If you are passing this footage to another editing program like Premiere, maybe you want to use something like ProRes or ProRes LT. But again, if you want H.264, you have to use Media Encoder. But let's say you do want a transparent background, we're going to hit 444, click OK, and then we're going to go to RGB plus alpha, and then make sure it is millions of colors plus. And that'll make sure that anything that is transparent will export as transparent. And then you can overlay it in another software. And then you can pick your output destination and hit render on the right. Let's hop back to composition, and then I'm going to click the composition button and go to add to media encoder queue. That'll open Media Encoder. Sometimes it takes a little bit for it to load, but just be patient, it'll show up. See, the last video I exported was an animated GIF, but from here we can go to H.264, and if you're familiar with Premiere, it is all the same stuff. Choose your output file, hit that green button button to export. So now you should be the most professional beginner in After Effects with all your basic skills. I hope this video satisfied all your basic needs and you'll go on to creating incredible visual effects or animations in the future. You guys like my Vine shirt? This is an authentic Vine branded shirt from the headquarters. It's cool. I like it. It's one of my favorite shirts. It also fits really nice. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and stick around for the next one.